So for my next few series of projects and videos, I think we're going to be venturing into some Victorian territory. And for the Victorian period, we will need some new structural undergarments, which means we will be making those combinations. You know the ones, those ones from the Mets, which sadly are under copyright, so will be linked down below. It is the very same ones that Bernadette Banner and Kat's Costumery and Enchanted Rose Costumes has made. Yes, those beautiful, drapey, lacy combinations. Alright, first things first is transferring our pattern to our fabric. I chose a very lightweight, very thin cotton muslin. The cotton muslin that I have is pretty much factory white, so there was some coffee dyeing in my near future. The pattern that I did use was Agnes Walker's from the Manual of Hand Sewing and Cutting Out or something like that. I'll have it linked down below. And once I had all of my pattern pieces cut out and seamed together, I started in on the insertion lace. So what I did for the bodice insertion lace and the legs was I kind of laid it out in the format that I wanted it to be. And once I got it laid out the way I wanted it to be, I just went ahead and pinned them down. In order to get these sharper turns and sharper angles for the bodice portion of it, I did lay out the lace and then cut it and then lay out the next section. Now, once all of our lace was pinned in place, I went ahead and basted it down with some purple basting thread. It's just very, very old polyester thread that I have lying around. I wanted to do a contrasting color so I could be sure to pull out all of the basting stitches later, as I didn't want any obvious... Well, I wanted to reduce the amount of obvious stitching that I had going on with the lace insertion. So I basted all of the lace down, and I tried to follow the scalloped pattern along the edge of the lace so that when I would whip it down and then turn over those edges, I could do it cleanly. Once all the lace was basted into place, I just cut down the center of the cotton in between the two basting stitches, and then I trimmed back the excess. With the excess trimmed back, I just clipped down the center of each little rise to turn the fabric easier. And now we begin the very, very long process of basting down all of these scalloped insertion lace. I did this with very tiny little whip stitches and a very fine ivory cotton thread. It would have been wiser to wax this thread, as it would prevent the tangling that I was constantly combating, but that is not something that I did. As I whipped down the insertion lace to the cotton base, I did fold under the seam allowance that was there just to kind of neatly tuck it away. These edges weren't finished, they were just tucked under as I whipped down the insertion lace. Now that our lace insertion is done, we move on to just hemming our crotch seams, I suppose. These are the openings for the legs in the combinations. As we know, combinations are split drawers, so we have to finish that edge. And I just did this by turning over the edge of the fabric twice. I guess it's a narrow rolled hem. And then I very carefully felled that down. I did a felling stitch because I wanted the stitches to be as unobtrusive as possible on the outside, or the right side facing of the fabric. So I did tiny, tiny little felling stitches. Once completed, I turned my attention to the little bit of lace insertion that attaches the flounce to the drawers themselves. And this was attached with a itty bitty teeny tiny little whip stitch. And the seam was treated the same way, where it was flipped over as I was whip stitching it. And I actually went ahead and basted this down into place as well, so it wouldn't want to flop forward onto the insertion lace itself, giving us a nice straight clean edge for the insertion lace. After all the lace insertion was attached and everything was hemmed, I went ahead and gave the drawers a quick iron as well, because they had the seams had stretched under strain of stitching, and there was a little bit of warping going on with the lace. I had to be very careful here to get the iron hot enough to press the cotton, but not so hot as to melt the lace insertion. The lace insertion, the wider 2.5-inch lace insertion, was a polyester, 100% polyester, and it will melt under hot enough iron. The lace insertion attaching the flounce to the drawers, however, along the edges, that was a polyester cotton blend, so it could tolerate a little bit more heat than the softer lace insertion. With our fabric nicely crisply ironed, it is time to start gathering. So I start by gathering the drawers, and what I do is I run 2 rows of gathering stitches in the same fine white cotton thread, and I do 2 just so I can make sure my gathers are nice and tidy. I only ran the gathering stitches along the length of the cotton, not through the lace insertion itself, not for the drawers. Once the 2 rows were done, I went ahead and very carefully and very slowly gathered down the cotton to be about 1/4 minus 6 inches of my waist measurement. So basically I took my waist measurement and I subtracted 6 for the lace insertion, and then I divided it by 4 for the 4 panels of cotton. For me, this was roughly 6 inches or so. And once we are gathered to the correct length, I went ahead and pinned the drawers to the waistband. The waistband was a length of lace that was cut to my waist measurement, and I just pinned the lace to the drawers with the lace on top of the drawers so that I could just go ahead and whip stitch the gathers to the lace waistband. This was done very carefully. I was doing my best not to upset the gathers. This was whipped down, catching each rise of each gather so that the gathers would stay in place once the waistband was fully attached. Once everything was securely attached, I went ahead and trimmed back the seam allowance and whipped the raw edges of the cotton to the lace on the underside as well, just to keep everything neatly and tightly in place. It isn't uncommon to see raw edges on historical clothing. That is something that they did. They didn't finish every single seam, so neither did I. Drawers attached, I went ahead and turned my attention to the flounce that would decorate the bottom of the combinations. So for this one, I just, again, very loosely gathered it down because I didn't cut a long enough ruffle, but I also couldn't be bothered to cut another one and attach more lace insertions. So I just very lightly gathered down the ruffles that I had already made and stitched them to the bottom of the lace insertion, attaching the ruffle to the drawers themselves. Okay, so like, pro tip from someone who is clearly completely incompetent, because pay attention to what you're doing when you're sewing, because I went and attached the ruffle to the combinations at the end of the leg, and I gathered it and I pinned it and I started sewing it on without even realizing that it's backwards. That's an inside seam. This is not an inside seam. It's completely backwards, and I've probably sewn about a third of the way through it. Ruffles properly in place this go around, I went ahead and whipped them down before they could reverse themselves again. Now that everything is properly attached, I went ahead and seamed up the crotch seam on either side of the drawers to combine the front and the back. And this was done with a, I believe it is a mantua maker seam. At least, I think it is. Maybe a bit rather what I think a mantua maker seam is. In any case, it does the job of completely encasing the raw edges within each other. And now we could finally attach our closers. So I chose to close this up with buttons going down the center front of the lace insertion for these combinations. And I did a simple buttonhole stitch in that same cotton thread I've been using. And I did a vertical buttonhole stitch. I did do this within the lace insertion itself because I felt when it was folded in half over itself, it was sturdy enough to handle the strain of both the buttonholes themselves and the buttons straining against the buttonholes once they were closed up. So the combinations, we have some progress, and I just want to show you because I think I'm going to make a couple changes to these because they come up like really high and I don't want them to come up that high. So what I did, I see like right there where the combinations come up quite high, that is about I think 3" or 2.5" I can't remember, lace, and it's really soft. It's really drapey. So the problem that I run into is at the top this lace doesn't want to sit straight. It just drapes, so it just kind of flops over when you're wearing it, which isn't the end of the world, but I really don't like the look it gives me. So I think instead of having the coordinating lace, and I didn't starch it obviously, so it's not really any kind of stiff at all, I think I will cut this down to maybe like about yay there or so along the combinations, like the actual cotton, and then just kind of redo that top portion with a stiffer lace. I'll have to dig through what I have because I really don't want to buy anything else for it. But that will do two things. It'll give me a stiffer neckline and it will lower the neckline so that the combinations will be a little bit more comfortable. And I think I can also take some ribbon and run it through along the top. The Inspiration combinations don't have that detail, but I think it's fine. It doesn't have to be exact. I did want them to be as close as possible because I really do like them, but this is as close as my skill level will get me, which I think is pretty okay. Ultimately, I do like what I've ended up with. I just need to shorten that neckline because it is way too high. Okay, so here are my options for the lace. I have this one, which I think will be too small to do anything with. This is what's on the leg bands, but I think it's too small. This one I have on the waistbands. It would be some nice continuity if I were to go with this option, and I think it would also be stiff enough to kind of, you know, hang in there. It's a thought. I might do this. I do have more of this, so really I could starch it if I really wanted to, but I don't have starch, and like I said, I don't want to buy anything else. I have these other two laces. This one, none of these colors match, which, you know, I don't care. Which I could do maybe that one, except I'll tuck that lower part in because I don't like it. That's an idea. Let's fold that one over too, just to kind of get an idea of what we're working with. So I do have this one. And then this one, I think, has the same problem as this one. It's just too thin. And in hindsight, this color matches this one almost exactly. Let me zoom you in so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Oh my god. Right, okay, so this lace actually matches this one almost perfectly, where I had to copy stain this one and you could see where the color just didn't quite make it. But I didn't have this lace when I built these, so, you know, hindsight, I guess. But this I actually picked up at JoAnns because they marked down a lot of their lace trims, so I just picked up these two and I got 4 yards of each one because it was a pretty good price. This one does have the lip ribbon already laced through. I would replace it with the same green that I plan on putting. But again, I don't think it's quite high enough for for my purposes. Although I do have the added bonus of, Well, I suppose I could drawstring that one as well if I wanted to like create those gathers by cinching it. So there's an idea. I don't know. Which one do we like better? I'm leaning towards this one. If only because this one's a little bit scratchy. This one's scratchier, but also I like this one because it does tie into this color quite nicely. So we're like, this lace and this lace matches the cotton portion of the combinations quite well. This lace really does match the flouncy lace that I have. And just for that reason, just for some kind of sense of this was intentional, maybe I'll do that. And I think if I stitch it down straight, then I could do just, you know, drawstring just to gather that. No, you're not going to drawstring it like a heathen. You're going to gather it properly and then sew the lace to it. Yeah, I think that's my plan. I think I'm going to do that. There's more than enough of it. And it does also tie into the leg lace as well. Because it's a similar kind of lace. So I think, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go with this one. Obviously, I don't own very much lace. I try not to buy stash stuff. I try to buy it when I need it, even if that does slow down the projects, just because I don't like having a lot of things. Hobby, crafty stuff included. Now that I have a solid battle plan in place, I went ahead and pinned the lace to the combinations where I wanted it to sit. The upper portion of the combinations is still attached. I just folded it under and pinned the lace in place. And once I had everything sitting relatively where I wanted it to be, I went ahead and removed the lace, but I left the pins where they were so that I could just cut off the excess combinations. This was a very hard thing to do because there was a lot of work that went into the top of these combinations, but to achieve the result I wanted, it had to be done, so it was done. And for accuracy's sake, I went ahead and took an overbust measurement as well, so I knew just what length to gather the upper portion of the bodice to. With the bodice loosely gathered, I went ahead and pinned the lace insertion back onto it so I could whip it into place. Wrong sides together, I pinned the straps of the combinations to the combinations themselves, and I did wrong sides together so that when you straightened out the strip of lace, it would fold underneath the top of the combinations, which would then be whipped down to the lace strap. This way I have a nice smooth edge and it looks as though the straps of the combination are growing out of the combinations themselves. And now to replace that awful nylon ribbon. I tried to do the clever thing where you sew the nylon ribbon to the new and improved silk ribbon and then just pull it through, that didn't work. And the reason that didn't work is because the silk ribbon is just a little bit wider than the nylon ribbon was, so it didn't quite fit through the insertion lace. It did fit, it was just very tight, so when I tried pulling it through, I would get these gathering instead. And the ribbon would also like to twist up while I was pulling it through, so I'd have to go through and straighten it out as best I could. It did ultimately work, it just wasn't as satisfying of a process as I thought it might be. After I got the ribbon through the upper portion of the combinations, I went ahead and threaded a slightly thicker ribbon through the waistband of the combinations. This ribbon was threaded through with a very large, very dull tapestry needle. And of course, our drawers will get the same treatment with the thinner ribbon. I went ahead and cut open some little slots for the ribbon to thread through and threaded through the thinner green silk ribbon. And as of completing this video, I am still waiting for the ribbon for the other leg flounce, but here are the combinations in all of their glory, a finished product. I am very, very happy with them. They are very comfy and they are very cute, but they cannot be worn on camera because of the lace insertion. Even so, they are very cute and I'm very happy to finally have them. So there we have it. Some frilly, comfy, beautiful, frankly, I love them so much, combinations. And now we are going to need something to wear over them. Some structural engineering projects.